why healing is real, why there's a scientific biological basis for it, and why we can actually begin to replicate healing once we understand the mechanism. It doesn't mean that we're never going to get sick or never going to die, because you can die and still be healed, which is, of course, what I was reading about earlier when I was reading the poems on death by Tagore. So here we go. My background is in medicine, in neuroscience and neuroendocrinology. And I went to the United States after I finished from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I finished my basic medical degree. And there were two things that happened in my life. Well, there were many things that happened in my life, but two things that are very relevant to what we're going to talk about just now. The first is that any physician will tell you, anybody who's in the field of medicine will tell you, that biological organisms, particularly human beings, do not respond in predictable manner to treatment. So it's something that we assume. You know, medicine is scientific. Medicine is based on reductionist science. Medicine, the brain and the body operate according to the laws of classical mechanics or classical physics. We assume that, but it's not true. Okay. You can have two patients who have exactly the same illness. They get the same treatment. They see the same physician, and they can have completely different outcomes. One person can die. The other person can recover. So that's a common thing. Physicians know about it. They don't talk about it. It's the unexplained phenomenon. It's the X factor. It's the white elephant in the room we don't want to acknowledge, because once we acknowledge, then we have to say what's happening, and then sooner or later we have to get into consciousness. So that's the first thing. The second thing is my own field, neuroscience, neuroendocrinology. This is in the earlier days when radioimmunoassay as a technique had just been developed. And radioimmunoassay is a way in which you can measure molecules in the body. Okay, so in the 70s, this had become very popular because two investigators, one by the name of Rosalind Yalow, had won the Nobel Prize. Now we can measure what's happening in biological systems. And we were measuring what are now well-known chemicals like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, opiates. Everybody's heard of these, I presume. And what one of my colleagues at that time, a woman by the name of Candice Pert, who later on, she was a fellow, research fellow, we were all kind of hanging out together. She later went and became the chief of neurochemistry at the National Institutes of Health, and she coined an expression which became relatively popular amongst us, molecules of emotion. So what her basic thesis was that emotional experiences generate molecules, and these molecules are neuropeptides because they're found in the brain, and peptides because they're protein molecules. And that when you feel different emotions, you have different body chemistry. Now that was very interesting to those of us who were interested in consciousness. And so we started looking everywhere in the body for receptors to these molecules. So, you know, the first place obvious to look for was immune cells. Immune cells which go by different names, T cells, B cells, macrophages, etc. If you look at the receptor sites of these little cells, they have receptors to the molecules of emotion. So right now, somebody inside you is having a conversation with themselves. And this is a very interesting conversation because it has emotional overtones, whether you agree with me, disagree with me, whether I fit into your ideology about what is right, wrong, etc. The conversation never shuts up. It is happening right now. It's happening even in your sleep, in your dreams. In a moment, we're going to try and figure out who's this person who never shuts up. But the fact is that the cells of your immune system are responding to this conversation. They're eavesdropping, they're listening to this conversation. What's even more interesting is that the immune cells are not only listening to this conversation, but they are participating in this conversation because they make the same peptides that your brain makes when you're feeling or thinking. If you ask a good neurobiologist today, what's the difference between the immune system and the nervous system? They'll say, there really isn't any. The immune system is a circulating nervous system. It has memory. So when your immune cells look at an antigen or an invader, pneumococcus or whatever, they remember, what was my last experience with this fellow? Should I leave him alone? Should I go after him? I have no experience with him, but my grandfather did. So, the memory is passed on, how to make the precise antibody. Not only our immune cells have memory, but they make decisions. So they're conscious cells. Okay? They have consciousness. If that's by consciousness, we mean memory and choices, sanskara and vasana, or whatever word we want to use. So the immune system is a thinking system.